global YouTube channel. Israel started the day by striking fear into its enemies. At first light, the Israeli Air Force, IAF, struck a series of Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon. Among the targets hit by Israeli jets were a Hezbollah command center in the Hanawai area and terrorist infrastructure in the Aita Ash-Shab area. Israel also killed a Hamas security officer from the Ain al-Hilway Palestinian refugee camp. The strikes came after the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, detected shells fired from Lebanon into northern Israel, causing sirens to sound in the Manara and Kiryat Shmona areas.
ऐसे मैं स्टॉक को सिलेक्ट करता हूँ, कहाँ पे एंट्री करना है, कहाँ पे एग्जिट करना है.
There is a pattern here also. What?
The shells landed in open areas and did not cause any injuries. A day earlier, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant sent an open letter to the Lebanese people saying that if Hezbollah continues its aggression, Israel will fight it with all its might. Gallant recalled the last major conflict between Israel and Lebanon in 2006, when Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah regretted his dangerous and miscalculated adventure. Gallant said Lebanon must learn from the past to avoid falling into a dangerous scenario in August 2024. The officials continued. Israel's constant elimination of figures within Hamas and Hezbollah further proves that the fight against these groups is not linear. Total victory was never going to be a blitzkrieg in the style of the Six-Day War. The nature of these groups and their physical and ideological entrenchment among the civilian population requires a protracted military campaign to gradually erode their military infrastructure and eliminate key figures of varying rank and importance. The media and pundits often characterize the Hezbollah-Israel conflict as an exchange of fire. But it is important to remember that Hezbollah made a strategic choice to enter this conflict by attacking northern Israel on October 8th. Intensifying hostilities brought Hezbollah and Israel to the brink of war. Without Hezbollah's decision to enter the conflict, the situation would probably have been different. The IDF launched a new attack on Khan Yunis, aimed at dispersing Hamas fighters who remained in the southern Gaza city despite previous Israeli attacks. The army said its warplanes hit 30 Hamas targets in the city, including fighters and weapons storage facilities. It said troops were searching for Hamas tunnels and other infrastructure while engaging in fighting above and below ground. Before the attack, the Israeli military dropped leaflets calling on residents of eastern Khan Yunis to evacuate the area. The attack was the third time Israel has launched a major offensive in the city. Several countries, including the US, Britain, and France, have urged their citizens to leave Lebanon after rising tensions in the region triggered fears of widening conflict in the Middle East. The warnings came after the U.S. said it was sending additional warships to the region, and Washington's embassy in Lebanon urged citizens to book any tickets they could get their hands on. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said his message to British citizens was to go now. The region is on high alert after Iran vowed revenge against Israel, which it blames for the killing of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in the capital Tehran earlier this week. Haniyeh's death came just hours after Hezbollah's most senior military commander, Fuad Shukr, was killed in an Israeli attack on the Lebanese capital, Beirut. In the latest diplomatic flurry, Iran's official news agency reported that Jordan's foreign minister paid a rare visit to the Iranian capital, Tehran, to exchange views with Iranian officials on bilateral, regional, and international issues. The developments have raised concerns that Israel's war in Gaza, now in its 9th month, could escalate into a full-fledged Middle East conflict. Lebanon-based Hezbollah could play a major role in such a retaliation. The militant group exchanges daily fire with Israel. Hezbollah fired 30 shells, most of which were intercepted by Israel. Later, Hezbollah claimed to have carried out a drone strike that hit a military target in northern Israel, saying it was in retaliation for recent assassinations and a show of support for Gaza. According to the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, Israel fired multiple missiles at suspected air targets that crossed from Lebanon into the Upper Galilee. 2 IDF personnel were injured when a target was shot down, and firefighters tried to extinguish a fire in the area. In a separate statement, the IDF said that multiple targets, including an arms storage facility, were hit overnight in Lebanon. It claimed to have hit a Hezbollah target. It also said it detected and shot down a suspicious aerial target passing through Lebanon and observed a hostile explosive drone passing through Lebanon and crashing in the Malkia area. No damage or injuries were reported in the incidents. Many countries had previously issued travel warnings but issued new advisories following the latest developments. France urged its citizens to make arrangements to leave Lebanon as soon as possible, the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs said in a statement on Sunday. Jordan issued a similar warning to its citizens. The country was involved in shooting down Iranian drones after Iran launched unprecedented retaliatory strikes against a suspected Israeli attack on a diplomatic complex in April. Turkey updated its travel warning for Lebanon, urging those who do not need to stay in the country to leave while commercial flights resume. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Öncü Keçeli issued the following statement. Our citizens are advised not to travel to Lebanon unless it is mandatory. Our citizens in Lebanon are advised to be careful, not to travel to Nabatea, South Lebanon, Bekaa, and Baalbek Hermel provinces unless it is mandatory, and those who do not need to stay in Lebanon are advised to leave Lebanon if possible during the period of commercial flights. Airlines such as Air France, Lufthansa, and Kuwait Airways have canceled flights to and from Lebanon, while others have diverted their aircraft away from the country. In another sign that the region is preparing for Iranian retaliation, the U.S. sent an aircraft carrier strike group, a fighter squadron, and additional warships to the Middle East on Saturday. It was probably the largest military deployment of U.S. forces to the region since the early days of the Gaza war. On that day, the Pentagon sent 2 aircraft carrier strike groups to the Middle East in a clear warning to militant groups in the region not to expand hostilities. White House Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner said on Sunday that the United States and Israel were preparing for every eventuality after the Pentagon sent additional military assets. Feiner continued, "We and our ally Israel are preparing for every eventuality, and the Pentagon's announcements were in that vein. All these posture adjustments are to prepare for a possible response against Israel from Iran or another adversary." According to a State Department spokesman, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed on Sunday with the foreign ministers of the G7 countries the urgent need for de-escalation in the Middle East. Blinken and the foreign ministers discussed ongoing efforts to achieve a ceasefire that would secure the release of hostages and the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, the spokesperson said. They also reiterated their commitment to Israel's security and called for maximum restraint from all sides to avoid escalation of the conflict. As Israelis continued to stockpile supplies, a dossier from the Jerusalem municipality advised residents to clean and prepare their shelters and warned that they should be able to reach them within 90 seconds. After all this, a very important development took place.
दोस्तों, एक पानी की बोतल की कीमत कब तक रहती है? जब तक उसके अंदर पानी होता है। एक बार पानी पीने के बाद लोग बोतल को फेंक।
The United States is preparing to pay Israel $3.5 billion for weapons and military equipment, several officials said, months after the money was appropriated by Congress in the wake of escalating tensions between Israel and Iran. The State Department informed lawmakers that the Biden administration plans to give billions of dollars in foreign military financing to Israel. The money comes from a $14.1 billion supplemental funding bill for Israel passed by Congress in April, sources said. The funding is essentially money that Israel can use to purchase advanced weapons systems and other equipment from the United States through the Foreign Military Financing Program. Sources said it is not unusual for it to take time to release money from these packages. But the funding was released this week because Israel and the wider region were bracing for an attack by Iran and/or Hezbollah after Israel assassinated senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders in Tehran and Beirut earlier this month. Israel will not immediately receive $3.5 billion worth of U.S.-made weapons. Instead, the funding is being provided so that Israel can procure systems that are currently being built and will probably not be delivered for several years. The additional funding has also allocated billions of dollars worth of equipment that the Pentagon can draw from its own stockpiles and ship directly to Israel on a much faster timeline. In recent weeks, U.S. diplomats and the Biden administration have also been focusing on peace efforts in the region as the threat of retaliatory strikes against Israel has increased. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi for the second time in a week about efforts to diffuse tensions in the region, the State Department said yesterday. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller emphasized the following in a statement. The Secretary and Foreign Minister Safadi discussed the joint statement by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, calling for an immediate ceasefire to provide assistance to Palestinians in Gaza and to hostages and their families. Meanwhile, a U.S.-made weapon guidance system was used in 2 Israeli airstrikes on Gaza in October that killed 43 civilians, according to research by Amnesty International. According to a report published by the human rights organization UNDP, parts of a U.S.-made joint direct attack munitions guidance system were found in the rubble of destroyed houses in the Deir al-Balah neighborhood in central Gaza. Israel uses a wide range of American weapons and munitions, but Amnesty International's report is one of the first attempts to link an American-made weapon to a specific attack that killed a significant number of civilians. According to the U.S. Air Force, the JDAM is a guided tail kit that converts existing unguided freefall bombs into accurate smart munitions that can withstand adverse weather conditions. Amnesty International explained that weapons experts and a remote sensing analyst examined satellite imagery and fragments of ammunition recovered from the rubble, and photographs of houses showing the destruction. The photographs were taken by Amnesty International field staff. The report says the 2 strikes killed 19 minors, 14 women and 10 men. The human rights organization said there was no indication that there were any military targets at the sites of the airstrikes, nor was there any evidence that the people living in the houses were legitimate military targets. The organization found that these airstrikes were either direct attacks on civilians or civilian targets or indiscriminate attacks, the report said, calling for the attacks to be investigated as war crimes. The Israel Defense Forces said the report was flawed, biased, and premature, and based on unfounded assumptions about IDF operations. The IDF continued its statement as follows. The assumption that intelligence on the military use of a particular structure does not exist unless it is uncovered contradicts any understanding of military activities, and the report uses this erroneous assumption to draw equally erroneous and biased conclusions based on existing prejudices about the IDF and its previous problematic work. The statement said the Army regrets any harm caused to civilians or civilian property as a result of its operations and reviews all its operations with a view to learning and improving. Amnesty International said in its report that the use of American weapons in such attacks should be an urgent wake-up call for the Biden administration. Amnesty International Secretary General Agnes Callamard said in the report that U.S.-made weapons facilitated the mass murder of large families. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matt Miller said that the department is reviewing the Amnesty International report. Miller stated the following: "In our discussions with Israeli leaders, we have made clear that we are deeply concerned about civilian protection in this conflict. We expect Israel to target only legitimate targets and to abide by the laws of armed conflict." The Pentagon also said the other day that it was reviewing the report. Spokesman Brigadier General Patrick Ryder said, "We will continue to consult closely with our Israeli partners on the importance of taking civilian safety into account when conducting our operations." According to the Congressional Research Service, Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid since World War II. The U.S. gives Israel an average of $3 billion a year in military aid, and the Biden administration has requested an additional $10.6 billion in military aid following Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th. The first attack cited by Amnesty International took place at around 8:30 p.m. on October 10th and killed 21 family members and 3 neighbors in an attack on the Al-Najjar family home. Based on the amount of damage to the house and surrounding buildings, Amnesty claims that this bomb likely weighed around 2,000 pounds. Photographs in the report show that the year 2017 is also stamped on the license plate, indicating that the bomb was manufactured that year. According to the U.S. Air Force, the JDAM is a guided air-to-surface weapon that uses the 2,000-pound BLU-109 Mk-84, 1,000-pound BLU-110 Mk-83, or 500-pound BLU-111 Mk-82 warhead as a payload. Suleiman Salman al-Najjar, a survivor of the attack, said he was sick and returned from the hospital to find his house bombed and his family killed. Suleiman Salman al-Najjar said, "I was shocked. I ran home and saw a scene of complete destruction. I couldn't believe my eyes. Everyone was under the rubble. The house was completely shattered. The bodies were in pieces." The report says that the second attack took place at noon on October 22nd and hit 3 houses belonging to 3 brothers from the Abu Mu'aylek family. A total of 18 members of the Mu'aylek family, including 12 minors and 6 women, and a neighbor were killed, the report said. Bakir Abu Mu'aylek told Amnesty that he lost his wife and 4 children in the attack. Abu Mu'aylek, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, said he was working at the nearby hospital when the attack took place. Amnesty International warned, "The United States may be responsible for serious violations of international humanitarian law committed by Israel with weapons supplied by the United States. This is because all states have an obligation not to knowingly contribute to the violations of international law by other states." The Human Rights Organization called on the U.S. government and other governments to stop the transfer of weapons to Israel that are likely to be used to violate or increase the risk of violations of international law. A state that continues to supply weapons used to commit violations can be held responsible for those violations, Amnesty International said.
Looking for some action?
Meanwhile, mediators in the ceasefire hostage talks between Israel and Hamas are making a renewed effort to bring the warring parties to the negotiating table. Fears of an imminent Iranian attack on Israel threaten to turn the conflict into a wider regional war. The leaders of the United States, Qatar, and Egypt have said they may present a final bridge proposal next week, calling on Israel and Hamas to reach a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza. The 3 countries are leading mediation efforts to reach an agreement, and U.S. officials claimed they were close to a deal before Hamas's political leader, the chief negotiator for the deal, was killed last week in Iran in an explosion believed to have been organized by Israel. Last evening, mediators stepped up pressure on Israel and Hamas to resume talks next week in Cairo or Doha. A source familiar with the talks said that a meeting was planned and expected to take place on August 15th, but that Israel and Hamas would have to confirm their participation. The three heads of state issued a statement saying, "The three of us and our teams have worked tirelessly for months to create a framework agreement that is now on the table, and only the implementation details need to be finalized. There is no more time to waste, and no excuse for further delays by any side. The time has come to release the hostages, start the ceasefire, and implement this agreement." The joint statement comes at a time when the region is preparing for possible attacks on Israel by Iran and Hezbollah, as well as other pro-Iranian groups. These attacks follow the assassinations late last month of senior Hezbollah military commander Fuad Shukr and Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi commented, "This situation is extremely dangerous. The threat of the region being dragged into a regional war is real. For months, Hamas and Israel have been exchanging offers and counter-offers with the help of the three mediators. The other day, the three mediators claimed that they are ready to present a final bridge proposal that resolves the remaining implementation issues. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office confirmed that Israel will send a delegation to the talks. Netanyahu's office said in a statement that Israel will send a negotiating delegation to a location to be determined on August 15th to summarize the details of the implementation of the framework agreement at the suggestion of the United States and the mediators. On the other hand, as we know, Yahya Sinwar, a senior Hamas official and one of Israel's most wanted men, has been appointed as the new political leader of the organization, replacing Ismail Haniyeh, who is in Qatar. Sinwar, who is reportedly hiding in a tunnel under Gaza, is hard to reach and is considered to be hardline in his stance against Israel. After 10 months of war in Gaza, Washington has warned both Israel and Iran against escalating violence in direct talks with Israel and indirect communications to Tehran through its allies. Iran has been told that the risk of a major escalation is extremely high if they launch a significant retaliatory strike against Israel, a U.S. official said. The official continued, "If they go down that path, escalation risks serious consequences for the Iranian economy and the stability of the newly elected government." The official said the warnings did not imply that the United States would launch a military strike against Iran. The Biden administration is preparing to defend Israel, as it did in mid-April during an unprecedented Iranian attack with more than 300 drones and missiles. This attack was preceded by a suspected Israeli bombing of an Iranian diplomatic facility in Damascus. Just days before Haniyeh's assassination, the negotiators met in Rome with Israel's intelligence chief, Mossad Director David Barnea, to receive Israel's latest offer. Barnea left just hours after an attack in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights attributed to Hezbollah that killed a dozen people. If a meeting takes place next week, it would be the first step in the talks that have been feared in the wake of Haniyeh's assassination and would revive hopes that an agreement can be reached. The Hostage and Missing Families Forum expresses its deepest gratitude to the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt for their statements. HMFF issued the following statement: "A deal is the only way to bring all hostages home. Time is running out. The hostages have nothing more to waste. A deal must be signed now." Later in the day, U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby sharply criticized the Israeli finance minister for his comments undermining the proposed ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, saying Bezalel Smotrich's comments were completely wrong. Kirby continued, "Some critics, such as Mr. Smotrich, have claimed, for example, that the hostage deal was a capitulation to Hamas, or that hostages should not be exchanged for prisoners. Mr. Smotrich is essentially suggesting that the war should continue indefinitely, without interruption and without any real concern for the lives of the hostages. Their arguments are completely wrong. They are misleading the Israeli people. Smotrich called the proposed ceasefire agreement a capitulation agreement and wrote on the social media platform X, "I demand that the Prime Minister not fall into this trap and not accept even the slightest deviation from the red lines he recently drew, which are also very problematic." Smotrich's statements come after President Joe Biden and the leaders of Qatar and Egypt issued a joint statement on Thursday calling on representatives of Israel and Hamas to resume ceasefire talks in Doha or Cairo on August 15th. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office confirmed that Israel will send a delegation to the talks. Hamas has yet to publicly announce whether they will attend. The shift also comes amid threats of retaliatory attacks against Israel following two high-profile assassinations in Lebanon and Iran in recent weeks. Last week, Israel killed Hezbollah's top military commander Fuad Shukr in Lebanon. The following day, Israel is widely believed to have killed Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, in Tehran. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied its role in this incident. Kirby sharply criticized the far-right Israeli finance minister for his comments following Smotrich's remarks, saying that, in effect, this would mean sacrificing the lives of Israeli hostages and is contrary to Israel's national security interests at this critical stage of the war. Kirby continued, "President Biden actually said this while directing the U.S. military to the Middle East to directly defend Israel against an attack from Iran or other Iranian-backed terrorist groups. The idea that he would support a deal that puts Israeli security at risk is unrealistic, outrageous, and absurd, and anyone who knows President Biden and knows what a staunch defender of Israel he has been throughout his public service should be ashamed to think otherwise." When asked what caused a senior Israeli minister to be so publicly admonished, Kirby dismissed the idea that his comments were out of the ordinary. "I think the better question is what made Mr. Smotrich decide to make this outrageous and absurd statement after the joint statement and the support for it, which was shared not only by other leaders, but also by Israel itself. Even before the joint statement, the U.S. had been lobbying its allies in the region for peace because of concerns about the escalating conflict. Earlier this week, Biden met with Jordan's King Abdullah and his national security team to discuss U.S. military presence in the region in case of an attack on Israel by Iran or Hezbollah. On Tuesday, Biden also met with Qatari Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also spoke yesterday with Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi for the second time in a week about efforts to defuse tensions in the region, according to a State Department statement on the meeting. The Secretary and Foreign Minister Safadi discussed the joint statement by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, calling for an immediate ceasefire to provide assistance to Palestinians in Gaza and to hostages and their families, State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said in a statement. This is Blinken's third meeting with Safadi since the Haniyeh assassination was reported on July 30th. Meanwhile, according to three sources close to the matter, the Biden administration has decided to lift the ban on offensive arms sales to Saudi Arabia. This would mark the end of 3 years of pressure on the kingdom to end its war in Yemen. The administration notified Congress this week of its decision to lift the ban, a congressional aide said. One source said sales could resume as early as next week, while another said negotiations were still ongoing over timing. A senior official in the Biden administration said the Saudis have held up their end of the bargain, and we stand ready to do ours by returning these cases to normal order through appropriate congressional notifications and consultations. Under U.S. law, major international arms deals must be vetted by members of Congress before they are finalized. Democratic and Republican lawmakers have questioned the provision of offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia in recent years, citing a range of human rights concerns and civilian casualties from operations in Yemen. But that opposition has softened amid the turmoil in the Middle East following Hamas' deadly terror attack on Israel on October 7th, and changes in the conduct of the operation in Yemen. The threat level in the region has increased since late last month, with Iran and Lebanon's powerful Iranian-backed Hezbollah vowing to retaliate against Israel after the assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. The Biden administration is also negotiating a defense pact and a civilian nuclear cooperation agreement with Riyadh as part of a broader deal to normalize Saudi Arabia's relations with Israel, but that remains an elusive goal. The administration officials said there have been no Saudi airstrikes in Yemen since March 2022, when Saudi Arabia and the Houthis entered a UN-led ceasefire, and cross-border fire from Yemen on the kingdom has largely ceased. Biden took a tougher stance on arms sales to Saudi Arabia in 2021, citing the kingdom's operations against the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen, which have led to heavy civilian casualties. The Yemen war is seen as one of several proxy wars between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Houthis overthrew a Saudi-backed government in Sana'a in late 2014, and have been at war against a Saudi-led military alliance since 2015, a conflict that has killed hundreds of thousands of people and left 80% of Yemen's population dependent on humanitarian aid. A senior U.S. administration official said, "We regularly conduct airstrikes to degrade Houthi capabilities. These efforts are ongoing and will continue with a coalition of our partners." The official continued, "We have designated the Houthis as specially designated global terrorists and will impose sanctions and additional costs on Houthi smuggling networks and military apparatuses. This pressure will continue to increase in the coming weeks. As we can see, work to de-escalate tensions in the region is in full swing,